The woman placed the cassette into the old tape recorder but didn't press play. She just sat there, elbows on her knees, staring at the buttons like they might press themselves if she waited long enough. The room was still, not quiet, still like the kind of silence that has weight. Wind moved outside the window, shifting pine branches against the glass. But inside the lake house, nothing stirred. No music, no ticking clock, no television filling the air with someone else's voice. Just Eliza and the machine, and the tape she hadn't played in almost 3 years. The cassette was labeled in faint blue ink. Lake Song, Take 5. The handwriting was unmistakably Dean's, a little slanted, always in all caps, like he was afraid the letters might slip off the page otherwise. The tape itself had been in a drawer, hidden beneath a faded scarf and a broken metronome. She didn't remember putting it there. Maybe someone else had tucked it away after the funeral. Or maybe she had, half-conscious, half-hopeful, thinking someday she'd be ready to hear it again. But she wasn't ready, not now, probably not ever. She looked around the room. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. The couch was the same tweed one they used to argue about. She wanted to toss it. He insisted it was perfectly broken in. The lamp still leaned slightly to the left. The bookshelf had a hollow space where Dean's guitar used to lean. The lake beyond the glass was gray and unmoving. No boats, no birds, just water holding its breath. Eliza stood up and walked to the window. The floor creaked under her bare feet. She pressed one hand to the cold glass. The condensation met her palm like breath on skin. A pair of loons floated in the distance, barely visible. Dean used to say they were like little ghosts haunting. Beautiful, never really belonging to the world above or below. She stepped back from the window, picked up the tape recorder and placed it gently on the mantel above the fireplace. She didn't rewind the tape. She didn't stop it. She just left it sitting there, like a sealed letter with no address. It was the first thing she'd brought out from the box marked studio stuff. The rest stayed packed. Mic cables, song sheets, a dusty keyboard with one broken key. She couldn't bear to see it all spread out again. Not yet. The tea kettle began to hiss from the kitchen, soft at first, then sharp. Eliza didn't move to silence it. She let it whistle a little longer than it should have, then finally turned the burner off. The sound faded, but the pressure it left behind lingered. She poured a cup, no sugar, no milk, and sat again, this time in the chair by the firewood basket. The fireplace was empty. She hadn't lit a flame since arriving yesterday. Somehow, it felt like cheating, like warmth needed to be earned. The cup warmed her fingers. That was enough for now. The cassette stayed silent. The bell above the tea shop door gave a single tired chime as Eliza stepped inside. It was the kind of sound that didn't rush anyone, more a suggestion than a greeting. She shook the cold off her coat sleeves and made her way toward the counter. The place smelled like dried citrus peel and dusted cinnamon pleasant, in a way that didn't ask for compliments. Wooden shelves lined the walls, stacked with jars and tins, most with handwritten labels. Behind the counter stood a man polishing the glass dome of a grandfather clock. He didn't look up right away. "Afternoon," he said, his voice rough but even. "Clock's not for sale, tea is." Eliza gave a faint nod. "I'm here for the tea." He set the dome down gently, then turned toward her with a cloth still in his hand. His eyes were gray, not cold, just quiet. His name tag hand-carved into a slice of wood read Caleb. "What's your mood?" he asked. She blinked. "Excuse me?" Caleb wiped his hands on a faded towel. "People don't pick tea. They pick how they want to feel: calm, warm, distracted, nostalgic, brave. Pick one. I'll match it." Eliza hesitated. "Muted," she said finally. "Not gone, just less." He nodded once, then disappeared into a back room. She could hear the soft clink of jars opening and closing. A minute later, he returned with a brown paper pouch tied with twine. Chamomile with a pinch of pine smoke and sage tastes like memory, but not the sharp kind. She took the pouch, offering cash. He waved it off. First one's on the house. I always cover the first less. Second cup's yours to own. She frowned. Why? Caleb shrugged. Because silence is expensive and most people overpay for it. There was no pity in his tone. Just observation. Like he'd said it before and meant it every time. Eliza opened her mouth, then closed it. She turned to leave. At the door, he added, "If the cassette's from before the snow, don't play it in that old Sony. Eats tape. I've got a Nakamichi in the back if you need." She turned slowly. "How did you know I had a cassette?" He tilted his head, half a smile threatening the corner of his mouth. Everyone who walks quiet has a sound they're not ready to hear. Eliza said nothing. She left with the pouch in her hand, and a strange heaviness in her chest, like someone had knocked gently on a door she didn't remember locking. Outside, the wind had softened. Snowflakes drifted like they were trying not to land too hard. She didn't know Caleb, but somehow she already knew he listened for things most people talked over. The library was old enough to creak when the wind pushed against its bones. Its lights buzzed faintly overhead, more out of habit than necessity, and the whole place smelled faintly of mothballs and sun-warmed paper. Eliza hadn't planned on going in. She hadn't stepped inside the Fair Lake Library since she was 23. But the rain had come sudden and cold, hard enough that she was soaked before she even reached the corner. So now, dripping at the doorway with a scarf pulled tight, she stood hesitating, unsure if she should move forward or retreat. That's when she saw him. Caleb, sitting alone at a table near the back windows, wearing the same threadbare coat from the tea shop. His head was tilted slightly, eyes closed. A pair of wired headphones cupped his ears, attached to a small silver player on the table beside him. His thumb tapped gently on the wood in rhythm to something only he could hear. Eliza stood still, watching. He didn't seem to notice the rain, or anything really, just the music, whatever memory it was made of. She took a step further inside. The librarian at the front desk didn't look up. The reading room had barely changed since her childhood. Same cracked leather chairs, same mismatched rugs. There was a new shelf labeled Digital Media, but it looked mostly abandoned. What caught her eye, though, was something else entirely. Tucked into the far corner, half covered by a faded sheet, was a piano. Upright, walnut. One leg chipped at the base. She hadn't seen it in years. The last time she played it, Dean was still alive. He had begged her to perform at the town's winter fundraiser. She refused, of course. Said her voice didn't belong to rooms with overhead lights. So he slipped a recording of her humming into the town archives under the title Unknown Locale. She was furious at the time. Now she couldn't remember why. Eliza moved closer to the piano. She peeled back the sheet slowly. Dust billowed up in small, sad clouds. The keys were yellowed, some slightly uneven. One had a deep groove worn into it, C4, like someone had played the same song too many times. Behind her, the music in Caleb's headphones stopped. She didn't turn around. "You used to play," his voice said quietly, not a question. Eliza placed both hands on the closed lid of the piano. "You used to listen." He walked over, still holding the headphones in one hand. 14 years ago, he said, I was in the sound booth during rehearsal for the winter show. You thought no one was there, but I was. I was never any good, she replied. That's not what the piano remembers. She looked at him then. Rain slanted against the windows, soft, now more curtain than storm. Caleb set the headphones down on the piano bench. I come here when it rains, old habit. The acoustics in this room are good for silence. Eliza raised an eyebrow. You listen to silence? Some silences are more honest than sound. She didn't respond. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment, then lowered the lid back down without playing a note. Maybe another time, she said. Caleb nodded. Another time is still time. They didn't speak after that. She left first, stepping into the drizzle without opening her umbrella. Behind her, the piano stood uncovered, the sheet folded neatly on top like someone had said, not yet, but hadn't forgotten. Inside the library, the rain continued to fall, and from the corner of the room, a single dusty key remembered the weight of a song never played. The rain followed her home, not loudly, just enough to blur the glass, to smear the outlines of trees into something seared and formless. Eliza left her coat on the entry hook, boots still damp from the walk. She didn't bother with a fire. The house was still as she left it, the same half-steeped cup of tea cold on the table, the same folded blanket draped over the armrest but never used. And the cassette recorder still sitting on the mantel like it had been waiting. She stood before it, arms crossed. Maybe it was the library, the piano. Caleb's voice, quiet but certain. Maybe it was just time. She reached forward and pressed play. The machine clicked to life with a mechanical sigh, then static, gentle, grainy, a kind of white noise that felt too familiar. Then came a breath, not hers, not recent. A long inhale, then an exhale, barely audible but unmistakable, male worn Dean. Eliza froze. There was no music, no melody, no intro count. Just that sound, her husband breathing into the recorder like he didn't know it was rolling. Or maybe he did. The air changed around her. The rain faded into the background. The room leaned forward. She listened harder. Another breath, then a chair creaking, fingers brushing something paper maybe, then silence, long, unbroken, heavy. Finally, a voice quiet and unpolished. I don't know where to start. A pause. I think I'm supposed to say something important, but I can't tell what matters yet. Then nothing. No explanation, no verse, no chorus, just the hum of the recorder still spinning, waiting for a song that never came. Eliza sat down slowly, eyes fixed on the window. The trees beyond it swayed in a rhythm older than grief. She remembered that afternoon, or maybe it was one like it. Dean had spent hours tuning the old upright, claiming inspiration came with tension. He'd scribbled lyrics in a notebook with half the pages torn out, told her Lake Song would be the one they finished together. But they didn't. He left the melody half-formed, left the tape half-empty, left her with half a voice, unsure what belonged to her anymore. The machine clicked softly again. End of tape. Eliza didn't rewind it. She didn't touch the recorder. She just sat there, hands in her lap, rain tapping the roof like an unfinished rhythm. The room was full somehow. Not with music, not with presence, but with what almost was. Sometimes the loudest part of a life is the sentence we never finished. The knock was too soft to startle her, more like a question than a request. Eliza peered through the front window. A small figure stood just beyond the gate, wrapped in a too-big pink raincoat that brushed against her boots. The girl had her face tilted slightly upward as if listening for something in the wind. Eliza hesitated. Children didn't just show up at her house. Not here, not by the lake. There were no neighbors close enough for casual wandering, no sidewalks, just dirt road and pine trees. She opened the door but didn't step out. The girl looked up at her with clear, deliberate unease. "Does your house smell like burned pine?" she asked. Eliza blinked. "Excuse me?" The girl shrugged one shoulder. "Uncle Caleb said it did, said he smelled it on his coat yesterday. I wanted to see." Eliza said nothing. She wasn't sure which part to answer first, the smell, the uncle, or the fact that someone had spoken about her house like it was some kind of forest spirit. "You're Caleb's niece?" she asked instead. The girl nodded. "June." Eliza. They stared at each other for a beat too long. Then June added, I brought my sketchbook. She held up a slightly soggy notebook with edges that curled like autumn leaves. Eliza noticed there were smudges of colored pencil on the girl's knuckles. I won't come in if it's weird, June said matter-of-factly. It's a little weird, Eliza replied. June considered that. Okay, what if I sit on the steps instead? Eliza glanced down the road, no sign of a car or guardian. The rain had paused, but the air was heavy with that silver dampness that made everything echo. She sighed. Come in, just for a little while. Inside, June stood on the welcome mat like she didn't know whether to remove her shoes or declare a truce. Eliza gestured toward the bench by the fireplace. You can sit there. June obeyed, pulling the hood back from her head. Her hair was dark and curled, slightly flattened by the damp. She looked around the room like it was a museum. It doesn't really smell like smoke, she said. It doesn't, Eliza agreed, but it feels like it should, June added, more to herself than anyone. Eliza poured hot water into a second mug. No tea, just warmth. She handed it over. Thanks, June said. Mom says you're not supposed to take drinks from strangers. I'm not a stranger. You are to me, Eliza almost smiled. The girl set down her mug and pulled her sketchbook onto her knees. I like drawing houses that look like they remember things, she said. Yours does. Eliza didn't respond. She just sat in her chair across the room, arms folded loosely. June flipped to a drawing near the back. She turned it around. It was a picture of a woman standing in the woods. Her arms were by her sides. Her dress was dark, almost melted into the trees, and where her eyes should have been. Just empty space. Eliza inhaled sharply. Why no eyes? She asked. She listens better that way, June said. Some people don't need to look to see. Silence filled the space between them. In the corner, the cassette recorder still sat untouched. June pointed to it. Is that the thing Uncle Caleb said might eat tapes? Eliza nodded slowly. The girl nodded back, satisfied. Outside, the wind shifted direction. The trees rustled like old pages. Eliza didn't know what had just entered her house, but it didn't feel like a stranger. Not anymore. June flipped through her sketchbook slowly, as if each page held a secret that might slip away if turned too quickly. Her fingers were steady, though, not the kind that rushed. I started drawing this one after the last big rain, she said. Eliza leaned forward just slightly, her tea cooling between her palms. June turned the notebook around again. The drawing was darker than the others, shaded deep with graphite and smudged charcoal. In the center stood a woman, tall and still, surrounded by trees that leaned toward her like they were listening. Her dress was long, simple. Her hair fell over her shoulders in soft waves. But it wasn't the detail that caught Eliza's breath. It was the face. The woman had no eyes, just smooth space where they should have been, like someone had erased them gently on purpose. She doesn't speak either, June said. Eliza didn't ask how she knew that. The trees in the drawing weren't just background. They curved inward, forming a kind of frame almost protective. And beneath the woman's bare feet were ripples, as if she were standing on water, not land. June traced a finger over the edge of the page. She doesn't move much, just waits, like she's not stuck, just paused. Eliza stared at the drawing. It wasn't her, not exactly, but something about it felt familiar in a way she didn't want to name, like seeing yourself in a mirror slightly fogged, over-blurred, but not hidden. She's not afraid? Eliza asked. June shook her head. I think she used to be, but now she listens instead. To what? June shrugged. Whatever the trees remember. Eliza didn't speak. She couldn't. For a child who barely reached the window latch, June saw too much. Or maybe she just didn't question what she saw. The rain had picked up again outside, soft and steady, tapping against the roof in even rhythm. It matched the hush inside the room. June flipped to the next page, this one less heavy. A picture of a lake with two boats drifting in opposite directions. "I made that one for Mom," she said. "She thinks everything broken is still floating somewhere." Eliza looked at her. Really looked. "How old are you?" 7.5. "You talk like you're 70. June grinned. "That's what Uncle Caleb says too. He says I've got old questions." "What kind of questions?" June thought a moment, then, "Like where does music go after someone stops playing it?" Eliza blinked. She opened her mouth, closed it. There were answers, logical ones, scientific ones, but none that mattered right now. Instead, she asked, "Do you always carry your sketchbook?" June nodded. "Drawing makes it easier to think, and quieter." Eliza set her mug down. "That's not a bad reason." June smiled again, then reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small pencil stub, barely longer than her thumb. "I'm almost out," she said, "but I always save the last bit for something important." She turned a fresh page, drew a line across the middle. "Maybe you'll show up in the next one." Eliza said nothing, but for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like she had to disappear into the silence. She let it hold her. The fire still hadn't been lit. Even as the afternoon leaned toward dusk and the room cooled with each breath of wind, the hearth remained empty. But something about the air had shifted. June sat cross-legged on the rug now, drawing quietly. The pencil in her hand worked in short, thoughtful strokes. No rush, no noise. Eliza stood in the kitchen, rinsing 2 mugs without looking up. She didn't ask if the girl wanted to stay longer. Didn't ask where Caleb was or when he'd come for her. She just placed a kettle back on the stove and lit the burner. Steam began to rise. Across the room, June didn't speak. She hummed under her breath some tune without shape, not loud enough to catch. Eliza reached into the cupboard for another mug. Not the matching set she used for guests. A chipped one dark blue with a faded image of an acorn. Dean used to call it the lucky cup. She filled both mugs, one with tea, one with just hot water. Then without announcement, she carried them back to the living room. June glanced up. Eliza handed her the cup without a word. June smiled. "This one feels warm even before you hold it." Eliza gave a slight nod. Then she walked over to the hearth. There was only one chair by the fireplace. Her chair. The one she sat in on the nights she couldn't sleep, staring at the dark glass where flames should have been. She gripped its arm for a moment, then turned, crossed the room. Pulled the second chair from the hallway corner, the one no one used, and dragged it gently across the floor. She placed it beside her own, not perfectly aligned, not symmetrical, but close enough to feel near. She didn't say anything, just stepped back and sat down in her usual seat, cradling her tea. June looked at the new chair, then at Eliza. She didn't move right away, but eventually she stood, carried her sketchbook and mug across the room, and climbed into the seat next to Eliza like it had always been there. They sat in silence. No explanations, only steam rising, pencils sketching, rain whispering outside the windows, and between them, a quiet that no longer felt like emptiness, but like space someone had decided not to fill with words. It was late morning when the knock came. Not sharp, not urgent, just 2 quiet taps enough to say I'm here, but not let me in. Eliza opened the door to find Caleb standing on the porch, holding a small black cassette deck in one hand and a manila envelope tucked beneath his arm. "You said yours was eating tape," he said. "This one's picky, but it plays clean if you're gentle." Eliza stepped aside. He entered like someone used to being let in quietly. No scraping boots, no loud greetings, just the soft thud of wood meeting wood. He placed the deck on the coffee table. It was old but well kept, the kind of thing someone doesn't throw away even when the world forgets how to use it. From the envelope, he pulled out a folded sheet of music paper creased, handwritten, stained faintly along the edges. "This was in the donation bin behind the music shop," he said. "No name, but the title Lake song, the handwriting. I thought you might know who wrote it." Eliza took the paper slowly. Her fingers hovered over the notes. The melody line was messy, unfinished, like someone had stopped halfway through a thought. But the chords, they were familiar, too familiar. "Dean," she said, almost under her breath. Caleb didn't respond. He just sat in the chair across from her, waiting. Eliza stared at the page. It wasn't the final version. It was something earlier, rawer, before he'd refined the rhythm, before they'd argued about whether the bridge should resolve or stay suspended. There were scribbled lyrics in the margins, some crossed out, others just left hanging. "If the water forgets the shore." And below that, in smaller writing, "Play softer after her voice ends." Her throat tightened. "This wasn't meant for anyone else," she said. "Maybe," Caleb replied, "or maybe he wanted someone to finish it." Eliza set the sheet down. She didn't want to touch it anymore. Caleb leaned forward and pressed play on the cassette deck. The static clicked in, then a few seconds of shuffling, Dean moving, adjusting the mic, clearing his throat. Then the piano, hesitant at first, notes landing like raindrops on an empty dock. He played the intro, then started again, faster, then slower, like he couldn't decide what the song wanted to be. Then he spoke, not to her, not to anyone, maybe. "This is nothing yet," he muttered, "but maybe she'll hear it someday and know where it was going." Eliza felt her chest pull tight. There was no full song, no polished recording, just sketches, failed takes, chord fragments, a man trying to reach something he couldn't quite find. It was more intimate than perfection, and far lonelier. When the tape stopped, Caleb didn't look at her. He simply stood. "I'll leave the player," he said. "No rush." As he reached the door, Eliza asked, "Why bring this?" He paused. "Because unfinished things still matter, especially when someone left them behind on purpose." Eliza didn't answer. She sat in the silence after he left, the sheet music resting on her lap, the tape still warm in the deck. There were no lyrics in her head, no melody rising. Only one thought. He hadn't stopped writing for lack of inspiration. He'd stopped because he thought she would finish it. And she never did. The house was still again. But it was a different stillness now, one shaped by expectation, like the moment before a bow touches string. The kind of quiet where you already know something is about to change, even if nothing looks different yet. Eliza sat cross-legged on the rug in front of the cassette deck. The sheet music lay unfolded beside her. A pencil rolled slowly across its surface every time she shifted. She didn't stop it. She let it move. She reached forward, pressed play. The click echoed louder than she expected. A few seconds of blank hum. Then the sound of fingers adjusting knobs, the scrape of a chair leg, the muted cough of a man trying not to make noise while preparing to make something. Then, piano. Soft, uncertain. A few notes strung together like someone testing the water with their toes. "Dean." He played the same phrase 3 times. Slight changes in tempo. A longer pause between chord changes. A shift in rhythm like he couldn't decide if it was meant to sway or march. And then he spoke. "Take 5. Not directed at anyone, just marking time. Then, "Okay, maybe this one goes under the pines." A few more notes. A stumble, a breath. Then something that wasn't music at all. "If she hears this, just know it was supposed to be hers, not a hit, not a masterpiece, just something that held space." Eliza sat still, her hand frozen above her knee. Dean's voice wasn't polished here. It cracked slightly on the word hers. Not with drama, just where. Like he'd been saying too much in his head and this was the first time it escaped. The piano came back in, now bolder, fuller. A rising sequence, then a shift to minor. The kind of transition Eliza used to insist made things feel honest. Dean used to argue that it felt unfinished. He'd compromised here. The chord didn't resolve, it just lingered. A moment later he whispered, "I'll finish it under the pine trees." Then silence. Not the kind that fades slowly, the abrupt kind, the kind that feels like someone stood up and left without saying goodbye. The tape kept rolling. There were no more words, no more notes. Just the soft, mechanical spinning of a cassette refusing to end without permission. Eliza pressed stop. She didn't cry at first, not in the way people expect. Her hands lowered slowly. Her shoulders didn't shake. Her mouth didn't open. She just stared ahead, eyes dry, jaw tight, the kind of grief that lives not in the lungs or voice, but in the spine. Deep, fixed, unmovable. Then slowly a single tear traced down her cheek. Then another. She didn't wipe them away. The player whirred as it wound down. A tiny click marked the end of the tape. And finally she whispered not to the room, not to the tape, but to the part of herself that had waited years without admitting it. I never came back to the pines. There was no response, just wind outside, tugging gently at the edge of the window frame. She stayed there a while longer, not because she didn't know what to do next, but because she now knew what she hadn't done. The kitchen in the old apartment had always been too small. There was barely space for two people to pass each other without bumping elbows. The tile was chipped near the sink and the cabinet doors never closed quite right. Dean used to joke that it had character. Eliza used to call it rented claustrophobia. In the memory, sunlight poured through the window in thick gold slabs. Late afternoon, the kind of hour when decisions feel heavier because the day's already halfway gone. Dean was leaning against the counter, arms crossed, a folded map in his hands. Not a digital one, real paper. Creased, soft at the edges, a red circle marked somewhere near the base of a lake in Vermont. "I found the cabin," he said. "It's a little rough, but it's quiet, and it's ours if we want it." Eliza poured herself a cup of coffee she wouldn't finish. "Dean," he held up a hand, "I know, it's fast, but it's not random. I've been thinking about this longer than I said." She turned toward him, one hip resting against the sink. "You want to leave the city, start over in the middle of nowhere. Why?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Because I can't hear my own music here anymore." She didn't answer. She took a sip of the too bitter coffee. Dean unfolded the map again and pointed. "There's a trail that leads straight to the lake. Pines everywhere. I thought maybe that's where Lake Song ends." Eliza stared at the map. "That song doesn't have an ending." "Not yet." The pause stretched. He stepped forward, softened his voice. "Come with me. Just for the summer, just try it. If you hate it, we'll come back. But if we don't go now, I don't think we ever will." She looked down at her cup. "I have deadlines, clients, a fall schedule. I've built something here." "So have I," he said quietly. "But maybe we've both built it too far from each other." That was the part she remembered most. The way he said it without anger, without accusation. Just a truth between them. She didn't yell. He didn't beg. There was no slammed door, no crying. Just her saying, "I can't right now." And him nodding. Not disappointed, just resigned. He left the next morning for a short trip to scout the cabin alone. Said he'd be back in 4 days. He never made it past the second. Car accident, mountain road, no one else involved. Just him, the wheel, and a rain-slick curve that didn't forgive. She never saw the lake. Never walked those trails. Never found the pines. Only the map, still folded, still soft around the edges. It was mailed back to her with the rest of his things, and she hadn't opened it since. It was late, closer to midnight than evening, and the tea had long gone cold. Eliza sat by the fireplace, legs curled beneath her. Across from her, Caleb was fixing the old clock on her mantel. He worked with small tools and even smaller movements, his fingers steady despite the poor lighting. "I thought you only fixed clocks in your shop," she said. He didn't look up. Most of them don't leave the shop. But this one's stubborn. It needed to hear a different room. Eliza raised an eyebrow. "You talk like they're alive." He smiled, faint and tired. "Some of them are." They sat in silence for a while, familiar now, not heavy. The clock let out a soft click as he adjusted the spring tension. Then Caleb spoke, voice quieter than before. "My wife used to hum while she watered the plants. Always the same song. I never asked what it was." Eliza looked up. He kept working. "She didn't have a good voice, off-key, but soft. I tuned it out most days, figured it was just habit." A pause. Then one day she stopped. I didn't notice. Not right away. The words settled in the space between them, like dust drifting before it lands. "I thought we were fine," he said. "She still made coffee, still left notes on the fridge, still kissed me goodbye." He tightened one screw, too tightly, backed it off half a turn. But it wasn't fine. She was getting quieter. Not just her voice, everything, her laugh, her footsteps, even the way she filled a room, like someone turning down the volume slowly. Eliza didn't speak. "I missed it," Caleb said. "All of it. Until the night she told me she was leaving. Not angry, just done. She said she didn't think I'd even notice she was gone." "Did you?" Eliza asked, her voice barely audible. "I noticed the silence, eventually." The clock gave a small whir as the gears caught. Caleb leaned back, wiped his hands on a cloth. "I replayed everything in my head, every conversation, every skipped question, every time I answered her without really listening." He looked up. "It's like when a radio fades in and out. You don't realize you've lost the signal until there's nothing but static. And by then, you've already missed the song." Eliza stared at the firewood stacked in the corner. She hadn't lit it tonight. Maybe she didn't need to. "She's gone now?" she asked. Caleb nodded. 3 years. She moved out, started over somewhere with better soil for her garden. That's all I know." There was no bitterness in his voice, just the kind of sorrow that knows its shape and doesn't fight it anymore. He stood, testing the clock's balance. "It's working," he said. "It won't keep perfect time. But then again, nothing does." Eliza watched him gather his tools. "You could have told me this earlier," she said. He shrugged. "People don't always need to hear everything. Sometimes they just need someone who understands what wasn't said." At the door, he turned back. "She stopped humming the day after we argued about a rug. A rug, Eliza." He shook his head once. "You never know what ends a song." Then he left quietly. No chime, no shoes scraping wood, just silence. But this time, Eliza noticed. The next day, just before dusk, Caleb returned. He didn't knock this time, just waited on the porch, one hand tucked in his coat pocket, the other holding something wrapped in an old kitchen towel. Eliza opened the door with her sleeves still wet from washing dishes. He nodded once. "I won't stay long." She stepped aside without a word. He entered quietly, set the wrapped object on the coffee table like it was fragile, unwrapped it with care. A small digital recorder, black, scratched along the edges, old but intact. "I thought this was lost," Eliza said. "I found it in the sound booth storage, buried in a box labeled Community Night 2010. She stared at the device. I didn't record anything that night. Caleb sat in the chair across from her. No, he said, but someone else did. He pressed play. The sound quality was rough mic too far from the stage. Audience murmurs in the background, but the piano rang clear. The opening notes were delicate, held just a second longer than expected. Then came the melody, simple, precise, unmistakably hers. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't even planned. She'd played it that night to fill time between acts. Someone had asked, and she'd shrugged and said, "Just something I'm working on." She didn't remember what she played, but now, hearing it, she knew. It was the early shape of Lake's song, not Dean's version, not the polished drafts or abandoned recordings. This was hers, her fingers on the keys, her phrasing, her rhythm. Not quite complete, but confident, unmistakable. Caleb didn't speak, just let the music run. Eliza sat back slowly. "It doesn't sound like me," she said, though even she didn't believe it. Caleb tilted his head. "It sounds exactly like you." She let it play through. There were no lyrics, no voice, just piano. The same instrument she hadn't touched in years. The same voice she thought she'd lost in the quiet after Dean, but it was there, unchanged. As if time hadn't worn it down at all, only hidden it beneath everything else. When the piece ended, the crowd gave polite applause, then silence. Caleb stopped the recorder. "I thought you should know," he said. "It's still there." She didn't answer. "I don't mean the recording," he added. "I mean the part of you that made it." Still, she said nothing. So he stood to leave. At the door, he turned once more. "You were never just part of his song, Eliza. He was part of yours." Then he was gone. The recorder remained quietly humming on the table. Eliza didn't press rewind. She didn't need to. She remembered now. The snow came fast, sharp, dry flurries that stung the air like ash from a fire too bright. By sundown, the road into the woods had disappeared beneath a thick white sheet, and the lake was lost under a flat, blank silence. Eliza lit the fireplace for the first time in weeks. She didn't light it out of ritual or nostalgia. This time, it was necessity. June arrived just after dark, wrapped in a second-hand winter coat too large for her frame. Her cheeks flushed, her breath quick with excitement. Behind her, Caleb struggled up the steps carrying a canvas bag and muttering about how fast the temperature had dropped. "They closed the road past the post office," he said as Eliza opened the door. "Didn't think we'd make it back to town. Hope you don't mind the company." "I'd rather not find you frozen outside by morning," she replied. June grinned and marched straight to the fireplace, holding her hands out to the flame like someone greeting an old friend. Eliza handed Caleb a dry towel. "Kitchen's warm. You can set your things there." He nodded his thanks, shaking snow from his coat. They didn't speak much at first. The wind howled against the glass, and every now and then the windows shivered with the weight of the storm pressing in. Dinner was simple: lentil soup, half-stale bread, and tea too strong from steeping too long. No one complained. It wasn't until the power flickered once, then again, that June looked up from her sketch pad. "You should play," she said. Eliza looked at her. "Play what?" "The thing that never finished. The one from the tape." Caleb didn't speak. He didn't need to. He just watched Eliza carefully, not pushing, not retreating. She stared at the piano. It hadn't been touched since the day at the library. The bench still had a folded scarf on top of it. Dust barely gathered, as if the house itself had waited. She stood slowly, walked over, sat down. Her fingers hovered above the keys. The first chord came without hesitation, deep, round, slightly too loud. The next was softer, then a shift. Caleb recognized it immediately. The structure of Lake's song, but this time, it wasn't Dean's hands shaping it. It was hers. The notes fell slower than the original, more space between them, but richer, fuller. She didn't rush to reach the parts Dean had written. She lingered where she needed to, added notes he'd left out. And when she came to the unfinished bridge, she didn't skip it. She created her own. A minor fall, then a suspended harmony, then silence. She stopped playing. June, sitting cross-legged on the rug, looked up. "Why'd you stop?" Eliza stared at the keys. "Because I don't know how it ends." Caleb stepped forward, gently placed the old sheet music beside her on the bench. "Maybe it doesn't end," he said. "Maybe it just continues." Eliza looked at the page, then at the piano, then finally back at the flame. She placed her hands on the keys again and played. Not the old song, not Dean's, hers. Outside, the snow kept falling, thick, relentless, soft. Inside, for the first time in a very long while, something moved. That wasn't wind or memory, it was music, and it was alive. The fire crackled low, a steady rhythm beneath the silence. Eliza was still seated at the piano, one hand resting on the edge of the keys, her shoulders softer than they'd been in months, maybe years. Caleb sat by the hearth, half dozing with a mug of tea warming his palms. June, however, was not ready to sleep. She had her sketchbook open across her lap and a pencil tucked behind one ear, humming to herself in a rhythm that almost matched what Eliza had just played. Then she started to sing. Not properly, not in tune, and certainly not in time. She made it up as she went, her voice light and slightly nasal. "Snow is loud when you're lonely, tea gets cold when you forget, pianos like to argue, and socks get lost, I bet." Eliza blinked. June kept going. "There's a ghost in the attic who just wants toast, a clock that dreams of running, and someone who hums when they're sad at night, but says it's just bad plumbing." Eliza made a sound she hadn't heard from her own mouth in years. A sharp breath through the nose, fast and startled. A laugh. It was quiet, quick but real. June looked up, startled. "You laughed," she said. Eliza covered her mouth, trying to suppress the smile that had taken her by surprise. "That wasn't even the funny part," June added indignantly. Caleb opened one eye. "That last line was about plumbing." "I stand by it," June said. "It's poetic." Eliza shook her head, wiping the corner of her eye, not from tears, just reflex. "You made that all up?" June nodded proudly. "Well, the part about toast is true." Eliza chuckled again, softer now. It wasn't the kind of laugh that erased anything. Not grief, not memory. But it was the kind that made space, the kind that reminded a body it could still make that sound. Caleb watched her from the hearth, quiet but smiling too. June, encouraged, began singing a second verse. This one worse than the first. Eliza didn't stop her. She just sat there, letting it wash over her. The off-key melody, the ridiculous rhymes, the warmth of voices in a house that had forgotten what to do with them. And as the snow piled up outside, the room just for that moment felt like it belonged to the living again. The fire had burned low, barely more than a warm glow along the base of the logs. June had fallen asleep curled under an old quilt, sketchbook still open on the floor beside her. Her last drawing, a piano with legs, walking through the woods under falling snow. Eliza sat at the edge of the bench, not playing, just resting her hands on her knees, her fingers twitching as if the keys still hummed beneath them. Caleb stood near the window, arms crossed loosely. The storm outside had eased into a quiet drift, but it would be hours before the roads cleared. He didn't look at her when he spoke. "Write it again." She turned. "What?" He met her eyes. "The song. The whole thing. Start over." Eliza let out a soft breath. "It's not that simple." "I know." She stood, crossed to the fireplace, tossed in another piece of wood. Sparks lifted and swirled, tiny lights chasing each other upward before vanishing. "I tried finishing what he left," she said, "but it felt like I was copying a ghost." Caleb stepped closer, but not too close. "Don't finish his, write yours." Eliza looked over at June, sleeping quietly, one foot slipping out from the edge of the blanket. "I don't even know what I'd say anymore." Caleb paused. "Then start with what you wish you'd said back then." She went quiet. The room was warm, but her chest felt cold, like something had cracked open and let in air that hadn't touched it in years. "You think it matters now?" she asked. Caleb tilted his head, not answering right away. Then, softly, "Not for him. A beat. But it might matter for you." She turned back to the piano, her fingers brushing the wood surface. "I don't want to write a love letter to someone who's not here." Caleb gave a small nod. "Then don't." Another pause. "Write it for the one who stayed." Eliza looked at him. For a moment she didn't see the clock repairman, the man who brought back a tape and walked carefully around old grief. She saw someone else entirely. Someone who knew what it meant to lose the signal and still try to listen anyway. She sat back down at the piano, didn't play, just rested her fingers there, quiet and still. Caleb turned to leave, giving her space, but as he reached the hallway, her voice stopped him. "Not because of him." He turned back. She met his gaze. "Because of me." He nodded once. No smile, no dramatics. Just the understanding between two people who had both learned what it meant to stay quiet too long and were finally choosing not to. The lake was still. Early spring had softened the edges of the snow, and though the trees remained bare, the water no longer hid beneath ice. It shimmered quietly, reflecting the pale sky in long, broken streaks. Eliza stepped carefully along the path, cassette recorder tucked under her arm, scarf wound tight around her neck. The cold wasn't cruel anymore, just honest. She found a fallen log near the shoreline and sat, unzipped the small case, pulled out her notebook. The wind was light, brushing the surface of the lake like a whisper. She placed the recorder on the log beside her. Pressed record, silence for a few seconds. Just birds, water lapping, her breath. Then the soft sound of her piano layered from a prior take, added digitally days before. The backing track she'd arranged herself late into the night when the storm had passed and the house had turned quiet again. This moment was only for the voice. She closed her eyes and began. "I waited by the water where your name was never said, and the pines stood like old fathers, counting years we left unsaid." Her voice wasn't perfect. It cracked slightly on the second verse. The wind pulled at the edge of a vowel, but she kept going. "I thought the song would end there where the letters fell apart, but it waited in the quiet. Not your echo, but my start." She didn't write it for anyone. Not for Dean, not for Caleb, not for June. This version of Lake Song didn't carry the weight of what was promised. It carried the truth of what remained. So I wrote it from the shoreline with no map, no final word, only chords I knew would hold me when the rest was barely heard. She finished softly. The last note floated just above a breath. Then faded. She sat still. Didn't press stop, just let the tape run a little longer, capturing the wind, a crow's distant call, the tiny sound of her fingers unclenching. Then finally she reached forward and stopped the recording. The cassette clicked. She looked out across the lake. Somewhere out there, past the mist, was where Dean had wanted them to live. Build something. Begin again. She'd never made it there with him, but she was here now. Not to recreate what was lost, but to name what remained. She stood, slipped the recorder back into its pouch. Before turning away, she whispered, not to the water, not to the sky, but to herself, "It's done." And for the first time, that didn't feel like giving up. It felt like arrival. The house was quiet again. Evening light slanted through the windows, catching dust motes in slow motion. Caleb sat at Eliza's kitchen table, headphones resting gently over his ears. The little recorder sat beside him, spinning quietly. He didn't move, didn't tap a finger, didn't hum, he just listened. Eliza stood a few steps away, her arms crossed loosely, not guarding, just waiting. The final notes of the song faded into silence, and the tape stopped with a soft click. Caleb took off the headphones slowly, folded them, set them down with care. He didn't look at her right away. He reached for his laptop, connected the recorder with a short cable, and opened a folder titled Unsorted Mixes. He didn't ask what to call it, he just typed, "Eliza, take one saved." Closed the file, unplugged the cable, then finally he looked at her, said nothing. She didn't speak either. She didn't need him to praise it or question it or frame it in meaning. It had been hers, entirely, and he'd heard that. He nodded once, then stood. "Tea?" she asked finally. He hesitated, then smiled slightly. "If it's the strong kind." She turned to the stove. Behind her, Caleb placed the recorder back in its case gently, like something worth keeping. Outside, the trees were still bare, but the wind didn't bite anymore, and the house no longer sounded empty. The lake had turned soft and blue again. A month had passed since the snow, since the recording, since the silence had cracked just enough to let something warm through. In the house by the water, windows were open for the first time. Just a little, just enough to let in the scent of damp pine and early spring. Eliza was in the kitchen, barefoot, stirring honey into a pot of black tea. From the other room, laughter, not hers, not Caleb's, June's, and not the polite kind either, the wild, unfiltered giggle of a child who'd just said something too weird for adults to answer. Caleb was on the floor, pretending he couldn't figure out how a paper dragon June had made was supposed to stand. "The tail's heavier than its head," he said. June rolled her eyes. "That's because you folded it upside down." "I followed the instructions." "There were no instructions." "That explains a lot." Eliza smiled to herself, not loudly. Just the kind of smile that settles behind the ribs and stays there. She carried the tea into the room, 3 mugs, slightly mismatched. One said "coffee first" in faded print, one had a chipped rim, and one was new, plain white, no words. She handed it to June, who inspected it like it might talk. Then, without being asked, June scooted over on the rug and gestured to the bench. "Play the one you made," she said. Eliza hesitated. Looked over at the old cassette deck sitting on the shelf, unplugged, untouched. "No tape?" June asked. Eliza shook her head. "Not today." "Why not?" Eliza met her eyes. "Because I'm not playing it to remember, I'm playing it to be here." Caleb looked up, something unreadable in his expression. Not surprise, not pride, just presence. Eliza sat at the piano, rested her hands on the keys, then played the same song but lighter. She'd made no edits, added no lyrics, but the rhythm had shifted. The space between notes felt lived in now, like a room where someone had moved back in. Halfway through, June began humming along, off-key as always. Caleb leaned back against the couch, eyes closed. The tea went cold, no one noticed. Outside, the lake shimmered. Inside, the air filled with something more lasting than sound. And the red light on the recorder stayed off, because this moment wasn't meant to be kept. It was meant to be shared. The ground near the lake had dried just enough for walking. June wore boots anyway, too big, rubber soles squeaking as she dragged a wooden stake through the dirt. Eliza followed a few steps behind, hands in her pockets. The morning was cool, sun slipping gently through mist that hadn't decided whether to stay or lift. They stopped at the clearing, just past the bend where the dock used to be. June pointed. "Here?" Eliza nodded. June knelt and hammered the stake into the soil with a flat rock she'd found near the shed. It took longer than expected. The wood was crooked, the ground reluctant, but she got it to stand. Then with both hands she lifted the small painted sign and hooked it into place. Still playing. That's all it said. No name, no date, no explanation. Eliza stared at it for a long time. June took a step back, brushing dirt from her coat. I thought about writing your name on it. Eliza smiled. I'm glad you didn't. I almost drew the piano too, but then I thought maybe people should imagine it instead. Eliza didn't respond right away. The wind rustled softly through the pine trees, just enough to make the lake surface ripple. Caleb approached quietly behind them, holding a small canvas bag. I brought the recorder, he said, if you want to make a clean version. Eliza looked at him, not unkindly, just steadily, then at the sign, then back at him. No, she said. He waited. She nodded toward the trees. It's already been played. And it's already been heard. June tugged at her sleeve. You sure? What if you forget how it ends? Eliza turned toward her, crouched down, and tapped the center of June's forehead with a gentle finger. I won't, because now it lives here too. June touched her own head, then smiled as if she'd just been given a secret. Caleb didn't say anything else. He returned the recorder to his bag, zipped it up carefully. They stood for a moment, three figures beneath the early light, staring at a crooked wooden sign that meant more than most people would ever guess. Still playing. Not finished, not perfect, not preserved, just playing. Eliza exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that feels like letting go without losing anything. Then she turned back toward the path. Time to walk home.